My sister took credit for my hard work while I supported our family, so I went silent, took control of her job and left her shocked. I'm a 26-year-old guy who's always been the quiet engine keeping my family running while everyone praised my older sister instead. Even saying that out loud feels strange, like I'm betraying some invisible loyalty oath I signed as a kid, but it's the truth I've swallowed for years. Growing up, my sister was the son everyone orbited, the one our parents called driven and naturally talented, while I lingered in the background fixing what quietly fell apart. The fridge was almost empty most nights, so I'd pick up extra shifts and come home smelling like grease and exhaustion, setting grocery bags on the counter as my mother barely glanced up from praising my sister's latest achievement. She'd smile and say, "Your sister's really something, huh?" And I'd nod, pretending it didn't hurt that no one noticed the way my hands trembled from being overworked. When bills piled up, it was always me pulling from what little I had saved, my dreams of moving out slowly bleeding into overdue notices and just one more month promises. I'd hear my sister laugh on the phone, telling her friends how she kept the household organized, while I sat there sorting receipts and calculating what I could afford to skip that week. At family dinners, she'd casually mention, "I've been managing everything really well lately," and my parents would beam at her like she'd single-handedly saved us, as I swallowed the urge to correct the twisted reality. "You're just so humble," my father once said, clapping my shoulder, as if my silence was some virtue instead of a wound I kept stitched shut. Inside, though, I was screaming, asking myself when loyalty turned into erasure and when love started feeling like a transaction no one ever paid me back for. Still, I kept going, convincing myself that patience had to count for something, that eventually they'd see me, hear me, realize who really kept this fragile little world standing. And as another bill landed on the kitchen table that night, heavier than the last, I told myself quietly, maybe tomorrow they'll finally notice. I never realized I'd become the family's safety net until everyone stopped asking and just started assuming I'd handle it. That thought kept looping in my head as I walked into the kitchen one evening and saw another stack of unopened bills waiting for me like a familiar insult. My mother didn't even look up when she said, "Can you take care of these? Your sister's busy with important things right now," like my exhaustion was some minor inconvenience instead of a quiet collapse. I stared at the envelopes, the electric bill, the overdue credit notice, the gas reminder, and felt something heavy settle in my chest as I whispered, "Yeah. I'll figure it out." Every time my sister talked, it was as if the room transformed into a stage built just for her. "I'm really holding this family together," she'd announce dramatically, flipping her hair, and my parents would nod approvingly, hanging on every word like she was delivering a salvation speech. I'd sit there numb, knowing I'd paid for the groceries we were eating, the internet she used to send her proud work emails, the lights that illuminated her self-praise. Inside, resentment twisted painfully, but my mouth stayed obediently shut because conflict felt more terrifying than erasure. Late at night, when everyone slept, the house sounded different, like it too was tired of holding secrets, and I'd run my fingers along the cracked kitchen counter, whispering to myself, "Just keep going, don't make waves." My phone buzzed non-stop with reminders and bank alerts, the cold blue light reflecting my own tired eyes as I calculated which necessity I'd delay paying just so no one else had to feel stressed. When I tried hinting at how overwhelmed I was, my mother sighed and said, "You're strong, you'll manage," as if strength meant silent suffering. And the worst part wasn't even the money or the exhaustion, it was watching my sister start speaking for me, deciding things for me, telling relatives, "He doesn't mind, he's used to it," like my entire existence was just background noise. Something inside me tightened that night, a subtle warning I chose to ignore, as the sense of being invisible slowly hardened into something dangerously close to breaking. I think that was the first moment I realized my name was being erased from things I clearly built, and the realization hit so quietly it almost felt polite, like even my anger was scared to disturb the peace. It started with small things, ideas I'd suggested over dinner suddenly becoming her plans by morning, my words echoing from her mouth with none of the credit attached. One night, I overheard her on the phone, laughing with someone from her office, saying, "I'm the one who streamlined the whole process, honestly they'd be lost without my management," and my stomach dropped because that process had been my sleepless brainstorming, my notes, my structure. You didn't even come up with that, I finally muttered when she hung up, my voice barely louder than the ticking clock. She stared at me like I'd said something absurd and scoffed, "Don't start being dramatic, you're just helping," and honestly, teamwork means someone takes the lead. The casual dismissal burned more than any insult, because for the first time I realized she genuinely believed her own version of reality. Around us, the smell of reheated leftovers filled the air, the hum of the fridge sounding almost accusatory as silence swallowed my frustration. Days later, my aunt praised my sister during a family call, saying, "We're so proud of how responsible you are, keeping everything together," and my sister smiled sweetly while glancing at me as if daring me to speak up. My palms started sweating, my heart beat loud in my ears, but I forced a weak smile and nodded along like a trained accomplice to my own erasure. I told myself it still wasn't worth creating chaos, that family harmony mattered more than my bruised pride, even as bitterness began settling deep in my bones. Every glance, every compliment she accepted on my behalf felt like a slow theft of identity, like someone carefully peeling the label off who I was and replacing it with her name. And the more I noticed it, the more I realized this wasn't accidental at all, it was practiced, calculated, comfortable, and somehow, that understanding hurt worse than the theft itself, because it meant she knew exactly what she was doing as she smiled over dinner once again, basking in praise that should have been mine. I stopped talking not because I didn't care anymore, but because I realized my words were being used against me, and that realization settled over me like a cold, deliberate calm. The more I tried to explain myself, the more I sounded like the bitter brother ruining his sister's moment, so one day I just went quiet. I started observing instead, the way she rehearsed her confident smiles in the mirror, the way my parents leaned forward every time she spoke, the way no one noticed when I slipped out for late shifts. The house felt heavier, like the walls themselves were siding with her, whispering that my silence was safer than truth. "You good?" my mother asked one evening as I pushed away my barely touched plate, her tone more casual than concerned. "Yeah, just tired," I replied, my voice hollow, while my sister smirked and casually added, "He's always tired, he doesn't know how to manage his time properly." The word stung, but I swallowed the response, feeling something shift inside me, not rage, not pain, just a strange clarity that scared me more than the anger ever had. I started pulling back little by little, skipping family conversations, avoiding eye contact, letting them believe I was just drifting. At night, the air in my room felt stale and heavy, the faint glow from my phone illuminating pages of notes I'd begun keeping, documenting every task I handled, every bill I paid, every idea she claimed. My heartbeat felt steady, almost eerily calm, as I whispered to myself, "If they won't hear me, I'll let them feel it instead." The silence became my armor, my planning ground, my quiet rebellion forming behind tired eyes and a forced neutral expression. My sister didn't notice at first, too consumed in the spotlight she thought she'd earned, but my parents began whispering about how distant I'd become. "He's just moody lately," she brushed it off with a shrug, like my emotional withdrawal was just another inconvenience to her image. I listened from the hallway, fingers gripping the doorframe, feeling a slow, deliberate resolve carve itself into my chest. Something in me had shifted from exhaustion to intention, and as I stared at the ceiling that night, a strange thought echoed through my mind: if silence had made her powerful, what would happen when I finally decided to speak in a language she couldn't steal? I found out by accident, which somehow made it hurt even more, and that sentence still echoes in my head whenever I think about how the illusion finally cracked. I was using my sister's laptop one afternoon because mine had died mid-payment, and as I searched for a utility receipt, a congratulatory email popped up across her screen. "We are thrilled to announce your promotion based on your outstanding leadership and innovation," it read, listing projects I'd spent countless nights mapping out in scribbled notebooks beside my bed. My hands froze on the keyboard, the faint hum of the fan suddenly sounding deafening, as I scrolled further and saw my own words reflected back at me under her name. "You got promoted?" I asked later, trying to keep my voice steady, even unaware of the way my knuckles had turned white. She barely looked up from her phone and smiled like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Yeah, my boss finally recognized my potential. I've been carrying so much responsibility lately. My chest tightened as I whispered, "Those strategies, they were mine," and she rolled her eyes, letting out a soft bitter laugh. "God, you're really clinging to this, aren't you?" she snapped. "You helped, sure, but someone has to lead. That someone is me." The words felt like a slap, sharp and humiliating, and for a moment the room felt like it was tilting, the wallpaper blurring around the edges as anger and disbelief collided in my gut. I walked out without another word, the hallway smelling faintly of detergent and stale air, my mind replaying every moment I'd trusted her. That was when it hit me. I hadn't just been supporting her, I had unknowingly built the pedestal she was now standing on while she smiled down at me like I was the problem. Inside, something final broke, snapping into a chilling clarity that made my hands stop shaking and my thoughts sharpen with purpose. This wasn't favoritism anymore. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was theft wrapped in family loyalty. And as I stared at my reflection that night, eyes darker, jaw set, one quiet realization settled deep into my bones: if she thought she'd beaten me, she had no idea what silence was about to cost her. I became calm in a way that scared even me, because the anger didn't explode the way I expected, it folded inward, sharp and calculated, like something cold learning how to move. I stopped reacting to her comments, stopped correcting her lies, stopped defending myself, and that silence felt different now, heavier, intentional, almost dangerous. At breakfast she bragged, "My team is finally respecting my leadership," and I just nodded, watching her lips curl into that smug little smile while something methodical turned over in my head. The scent of burnt toast lingered between us, and I realized how easy it had become for her to mistake my restraint for surrender. Behind the scenes, though, I started working in a way no one noticed. I revisited every project I'd shaped, every system I'd organized, every foundation she'd claimed as her own, and began tracing the lines back to their origin, me. I saved emails, screenshots, timelines, my steady fingers documenting everything like evidence for a future that hadn't happened yet. Late nights returned, but they felt different now, the soft tap of my keyboard no longer driven by desperation but by quiet control. "You're overthinking again," my mom said when she saw me lost in thought, and I forced a small smile as if she hadn't just unknowingly fueled the fire. My sister would toss me casual remarks, "You should be proud of me, you know," like she was extending generosity instead of arrogance. I'd swallow my response, my jaw tightening, and say, "Yeah, I guess," feeling the bitter irony settle beneath my skin. The house felt like a stage where everyone played their assigned roles, and mine had finally cracked under the weight of pretending. I began researching, carefully, how her department worked, who her supervisors were, what gaps she couldn't see because she'd never truly understood the work. My mind buzzed with quiet focus, a strange sense of clarity guiding each move, as if the silence had sharpened me into something unrecognizable. Every breath felt deliberate, every pause controlled, every glance measured. And as I sat in the dark that night, phone glowing against my tired face, one unsettling thought crept in and refused to leave: what would she do when the voice she built her success on finally spoke somewhere she couldn't interrupt? I never imagined revenge would look this quiet, because there was no screaming, no dramatic moment, just my resume sliding into her company's system like a blade wrapped in velvet. I'd spent weeks refining it, carefully outlining real metrics, real strategies, real work she'd never truly understood, and every word felt like reclaiming a piece of myself she'd stolen. The interview process moved faster than I expected, my palms slick with sweat as I sat in a sterile office that smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink, listening to a hiring manager say, "Your experience is impressive. Why haven't we seen your name attached before?" I almost laughed at the cruel irony, but instead I swallowed and replied, "I preferred working quietly." Days later, a call came through, my phone vibrating on the edge of my desk at home while my sister laughed loudly in the next room, talking about how irreplaceable she was. "We'd like to bring you on board," the voice said, calm and professional. "You'd be entering at a supervisory level." My heart dipped violently into my chest, a mix of dread and validation tangling together, as I realized what that meant. She had no idea she'd soon be answering to the person she'd silenced. When my first day arrived, the air inside the building felt colder than expected, every step echoing against the polished floors as I wore a name badge that felt eerily heavy. I saw her across the office laughing with colleagues, confident and radiant, completely unaware that the ground beneath her was already shifting. Our eyes met briefly, confusion flashing across her face as she mouthed, "What are you doing here?" But I didn't answer, just nodded stiffly like she was any other employee. "Everyone, this is our new supervisor," the manager announced, and the room quieted in a way that felt surreal. My sister's smile slowly faltered, her posture stiffening as the realization crept in, silent but unmistakable. I felt a strange tremor rise in my chest, not triumph, not pity, just a cold awareness of how fragile power really is when it's built on lies. As the meeting wrapped and people dispersed, she approached me hesitantly, her voice suddenly stripped of its usual arrogance. "We need to talk," she whispered, eyes wide with disbelief, and for the first time in my life, I realized the roles had finally reversed, but whether I was ready to face her reaction, I still didn't know. I didn't realize how fragile her confidence was until I stopped protecting it, and the change in her began subtle, almost imperceptible, like a hairline fracture spreading under polished glass. After that first confrontation, she avoided me in the office, her laughter forced, her voice slightly too high as she tried performing normalcy for everyone watching. I'd hear her whisper to coworkers, "He's just here temporarily, I've handled everything long before he showed up," but the way she kept glancing over her shoulder betrayed the fear she'd never felt before. The air around her desk felt charged, tense, as if the entire room sensed the shift in power before words ever confirmed it. Emails began piling up in her inbox that she couldn't answer without my input, tasks suddenly exposing her lack of real understanding. "Can you walk me through this again?" she asked quietly one afternoon, her eyes barely meeting mine, voice stripped of the superiority she once wore so comfortably. I leaned back slightly and replied evenly, "You said you managed it best, remind me how you plan to fix this." The silence that followed was thick enough to suffocate, her face flushing as coworkers paused nearby, pretending not to listen while absorbing every second. At home, things grew uglier. My parents noticed her tension, her clipped responses, the way she snapped over minor things, and confusion replaced blind admiration. "What's wrong with you lately?" my mother asked her, concerned, while she slid a sharp glance at me. "He's trying to humiliate me," she hissed later when we were alone, her voice trembling in a way I'd never heard before. I stared at her, calm and unflinching, and answered, "You humiliated yourself. I just stopped covering for it." The house felt colder, heavier, like every shared memory echoed hollowly through the cracked walls. I felt the dissonance between the past version of her and the present one, as if watching someone unravel while pretending it didn't affect me. But the true unraveling hadn't even begun yet, and as I walked past her workspace that evening, seeing her crumble under the weight of expectations she'd never truly earned, one unsettling question echoed in my mind: what would happen when the truth finally surfaced in front of everyone who once worshipped her name? I didn't think there was anything left that could hurt more than being erased, until the very people I kept alive turned around and called me the villain. The words still echo in my chest, sharp and heavy, as I remember how the confrontation unfolded like a slow-motion accident I couldn't escape. My parents called a family meeting in the living room, the air thick with the smell of overbrewed tea and unspoken judgment, and my sister sat there with trembling hands, eyes glassy and wounded like she was the one betrayed. "He's sabotaging me," she choked out, her voice cracking just enough to sound sincere. "He's doing this out of spite." My mother's gaze cut straight through me. "Why would you do this to your own sister?" she demanded, her tone laced with disappointment, like my integrity meant nothing compared to her tears. I tried to speak, my throat dry, voice shaking. "I'm not ruining her. I just stopped fixing everything for her," I said quietly, but it sounded so small against the storm of accusations. "You've always been jealous," my father snapped. "You couldn't handle her success, so you turned cold." Each word felt like a blade, slicing through years of sacrifice they'd conveniently forgotten. The corners of the room felt like they were closing in, my heartbeat thundering in my ears as my sister sobbed louder, performing pain so convincingly that even I almost doubted myself. "You're heartless," she whispered as if I'd shattered her instead of finally refusing to be shattered myself. I stared at their faces, searching for any flicker of recognition, any memory of who paid the bills, who skipped meals, who held everything together in silence, but all I saw was blame. The loneliness hit me like a physical weight, crushing, isolating, suffocating, as I realized I had never been their son or brother in their eyes, just the person who made things easier. I felt myself breaking inside, a quiet, devastating collapse no one bothered to notice. And as I walked out into the cold night air, the doors slamming behind me like the final punctuation on my rejection, one thought consumed me: if this was the moment they abandoned me completely, what would it take for the truth to finally be seen? I didn't sleep that night, because the silence after walking out felt too loud, too final, like the city itself was holding its breath waiting for what I'd do next. The cold air clung to my skin as I sat on a park bench, staring at the faint blur of streetlights and wondering how quickly love turned into accusation. My phone buzzed with unread messages from my mother and sister, fragments of guilt and anger mashed together, but I couldn't bring myself to open them. Instead, I stared at my reflection in the dark screen and realized something terrifyingly clear: nothing would change unless the truth was dragged into the light, no matter how ugly it looked. The next morning, I walked into the office with a knot twisting tightly in my stomach and a folder under my arm that felt heavier than any bill I'd ever paid. The fluorescent lights hummed above me, mechanical and indifferent, as I requested a private meeting with the department head. Sitting across from his polished desk, hands damp and pulse racing, I finally said the words I'd rehearsed 100 times in my head. "There's something you need to see," I whispered, sliding forward every timeline, every screenshot, every document proving whose work built what everyone praised. He leaned forward slowly, scanning through the evidence with growing intensity, his brows furrowing deeper with each page. This is extensive," he murmured, glancing up at me with a look I couldn't read, somewhere between disbelief and realization. I swallowed hard, my voice barely steady as I replied, "I never wanted this to be a battle. I just wanted my name back." The silence that followed felt endless, every second stretching painfully as my chest tightened. Outside the glass walls of his office, I could see my sister laughing nervously with coworkers, completely unaware that her carefully constructed reality was being peeled apart piece by piece. The contrast made my stomach churn, a hollow ache mixing with something close to relief. When the department head finally spoke again, his tone low and serious, it sent a chill straight down my spine. "We're going to have to investigate this immediately," he said, eyes locking with mine in a way that told me this was no longer just a family issue. And as I stepped back into the hallway, feeling the air shift around me, one dreadful question echoed louder than anything else: how would she react when she realized the walls had finally started to close in? I saw it in her eyes before she even spoke, that moment when confidence dissolved into something raw and terrified, and for the first time, she looked exactly how I'd felt for years. The department head called her into the office mid-afternoon, his voice sharp and formal, and the entire floor went quiet as she walked past me, trying too hard to hold her chin high. Her heels echoed against the tile, each step sounding heavier than the last, and when the door closed behind her, an unbearable tension settled over the room like a held breath. Minutes crawled by, every tick of the wall clock slicing through my chest, until the door finally opened and she stepped out pale and trembling. Her eyes locked onto mine instantly, wide and glassy, like she'd just been dragged out of a collapsing world. "You did this," she hissed under her breath as she rushed toward me, her voice cracking with disbelief and humiliation. "You ruined me. You're enjoying this, aren't you?" I stared back, heart pounding but expression still, and quietly replied, "You ruined yourself when you decided I didn't exist." Her hands clenched at her sides, and for a second the sister I thought I knew flickered through her expression, desperation replacing pride. "Please, just tell them it was a misunderstanding," she whispered, eyes darting anxiously around the office. "You know they won't listen to me now." The sound of her begging felt surreal, like a twisted echo of every time I'd silently pleaded for recognition and been ignored. My throat tightened as the weight of our shared history pressed against my ribs, but I didn't soften. "You never listened when I asked for the truth to matter," I said, my voice low and steady, even as my hands trembled slightly at my sides. Why should I lie for you now? Her composure shattered right there, in front of everyone who once adored her, and she turned away, shoulders shaking with quiet sobs she tried desperately to hide. The office buzzed with whispers, eyes following her every move, and I felt an odd mix of relief and ache stirring inside my chest. But just as I thought the storm had peaked, the department head stepped out again, his gaze firm and serious, and said words that made my pulse spike, "We need both of you back inside. This isn't over yet." I never thought closure would feel this quiet, and that realization hit me as I sat across a polished conference table, the air sharp with tension and the faint scent of antiseptic cleaner. The department head spoke calmly but firmly, laying out the investigation results in a tone that felt heavier than any accusation my family had ever thrown at me. Every documented proof, every timestamp, every stolen idea was placed on full display, and for once, my truth wasn't being drowned out by her tears. My sister stared at the table, her shoulders sagging, her once unshakable confidence reduced to silence, and something in me finally exhaled. When they announced her formal demotion and disciplinary action, the room went unnervingly still, like the universe acknowledged the shift. "Your work will be recognized properly moving forward," the manager said to me, and hearing my name spoken with genuine respect felt almost unfamiliar. I nodded, a strange mix of exhaustion and relief flooding through my veins, as if years of tension had finally loosened their grip. Yet when I glanced at my sister, I didn't feel triumph, just a hollow understanding of how far betrayal had pushed us. At home, things changed in ways no apology could fix. My parents tried to soften their tone, awkwardly murmuring, "We didn't know it was this bad," but the words felt too late, too thin. I watched my sister move through the house quietly, avoiding eye contact, her presence alone reminding me of scars that hadn't fully healed. One night she whispered, "I never meant for it to go this far," and for a moment, I saw vulnerability instead of arrogance, but the damage had already carved itself too deep. What shocked me the most wasn't her downfall, but the peace that settled into me once I stopped trying to be seen by people who only loved the version of me that made their lives easier. I began setting boundaries, choosing distance, reclaiming time that once felt like it belonged to everyone but me. And as I stood alone on my balcony, the cool night air brushing my tired skin, one final thought drifted through my mind: maybe silence wasn't my weakness after all, but the strength that finally taught me who I never again deserved to be for anyone.